Hello and welcome to Climate Talks. Our topic in this edition is climate smart agriculture. It's about the use of sustainable methods of farming to tackle some of the many climate challenges that we face, essentially with reference to food security of millions of people. We will turn to Professor Geethalakshmi of the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University for her views on the uses and development of smart agriculture, to be followed by the views of two eminent experts, Dr. Arun Khatri-Chhetri, who is an agricultural economist working with the CGIAR research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security. Dr. Arun will be joining us from the USA. Also, we have with us James Giles, who is a specialist in climate strategy with the Alliance of Biodiversity International and International Center for Tropical Agriculture, based in Vietnam, where he works under the Climate Action Team. Before the end of the program, we will also hear from Dr. Pashupati Chaudhary about the role that ADPC is playing in supporting climate smart agriculture through the Climate Adaptation and Resilience or Care for South Asia project, which is supported by the World Bank. The Care for South Asia project focuses on mainstreaming climate resilience into the development planning process across key sectors, including agriculture, integrated water resources management, road infrastructure, and public policy and finance. But as an introduction to smart agriculture, and before we hear the views of our expert contributors, let's acquaint ourselves with some of the main projects and facts associated with the concept of climate smart agriculture.
The term climate smart agriculture, or CSA, was coined by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in 2010. It encapsulates the need for agriculture in developing countries to undergo a significant transformation if the challenges of food security in the face of climate change are to be met. And those challenges are many. Himalayan snow and ice that provides vast amounts of water for agriculture in Asia are expected to decline by 20% during the next decade. Models suggest that climate change may lead to a decline in rice production of 14% in South Asia. And these changes particularly affect resource-poor smallholder farmers. Their agricultural operations tend to be barely profitable and are often environmentally unsustainable. If, as expected, the world population reaches 9 billion by 2050, a 70% increase in total agricultural production will be required. It means that production systems need to increase their productivity levels, which also means that institutional and financial support is essential to enable smallholders to make that transition. CSA is not a set of practices that can be universally applied, but rather an approach that involves different elements embedded in local contexts. It relates to actions both on-farm and beyond the farm, and incorporates technologies, policies, institution, and investments. The three main objectives are sustainability by increasing agricultural productivity and incomes, adapting and building resilience to climate change, and reducing and/or removing greenhouse gas emissions where possible. South Asia as a region has shown tremendous progress in the last 4 decades in food production and availability. Yet, a quarter of the world's hungry and 40% of the world's malnourished children and women live here. One example of a successful CSA project is in Bangladesh, aiming to boost the resilience of livestock farmers by improving animal health, including improvements in feeding strategies, breeding, manure, and waste management, as well as low-emission technologies for activities such as milk chilling and transport. And in Pakistan, another example is the Punjab Irrigated Agriculture Productivity Improvement Programme. The project contributes to increased agricultural production, employment and incomes, higher living standards, and positive environmental outcomes. 500,000 farm families are directly benefiting from this project, and more than 15,000 full-time jobs have been created.
Based at the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University in India, Professor Geethalakshmi is a respected scholar of climate change projections in the agriculture sector. Welcome to Climate Talks, Professor. Perhaps it is an all-encompassing question, but how should we in South Asia approach the concept of climate-smart agriculture?
Actually, South Asia is a very vulnerable region, basically because it is having almost 1.6 billion people it's housing, almost 2.4% of the world's land area it's having, but it is housing 17% of the world population. And when we just look at the poverty level, almost 40% of the world's poor people are residing in this region, and 1/4 of the world's hungry and 40% of the world's malnourished children and women are present here. And when we just look at the vulnerability, 50% of the population depends on agriculture sector, and more than 80% of the farms are small and marginal farms. And the food production, it need to be increased at least by 60% in the mid-century, at least in 2050s. So the food, and not only that, the food consumption has also increased over time. It was actually 1900 kilocalories. Now it is 2500 kilocalories. So at this, to keep the pace, we have to increase the food production by 60%. Actually, the FAO report published during 2018 on the state of food security and nutrition in the world has clearly stated that climate vulnerability and extremes are the key drivers. So under this context, basically speaking, when we just look at the climate changes, means the observed climate changes, it says that the temperature has increased almost to something like 0.12 to 0.18 degrees Celsius in most of the countries. In some of the countries, in like Afghanistan, it is more than 2 degrees Celsius increase has already happened. But if you just look at the rainfall is also varying to a greater extent, and in most of the places there is a decrease in rainfall trend has happened. Especially, again, I'm coming to the Afghanistan case, there is reports saying that 27% reduction in rainfall has happened from the period 1950 to 2010. So over 60 years of time, there is so much reduction in rainfall has happened. So under such context, it is becoming very, very important that this sector is becoming highly vulnerable, and we need to look into climate smart agriculture. There should be climate actions that should immediately happen.
So, I mean, as you said, that South Asia, largely we have small farmers here, and there are many other issues related to adapting to new technologies. So, do you think this? This concept is really economically viable when it comes to small farmers?
Exactly. The climate smart agriculture, actually, it dwells on three important pillars. Actually speaking, the climate smart agriculture is increasing the productivity level sustainably. That is the first pillar, which is the climate smart agriculture. So the productivity need to be increased, but at a sustainable manner. The second important thing is building resilience and adaptation to climate change. So whatever the changes that is happening over the time because of the vulnerable climatic conditions, there should be some resilience developed in the agriculture system. That is the second pillar. The third pillar is either we have to reduce or remove the greenhouse gas emission, whatever the way possible. When I come to greenhouse gas emission, the greenhouse gas emission is mainly happening because of agriculture sector also. Agriculture sector is getting impacted by greenhouse gas emission, but it is also responsible for emitting greenhouse gases. Almost 5 to 5.8 gigatons of carbon dioxide is coming out from the agriculture sector. It is almost 17.6% of the total emission. And this is really important. We need to just concentrate and reduce the emissions. When we just come to the emissions within the sector, the enteric fermentation is the major emitter as far as agriculture field is concerned. The second one is the paddy fields. So these are the two sectors which is contributing much to the greenhouse gas emission. So climate smart agriculture will protect the environment and also save the livelihood of the farming community by increasing the productivity, sustainability, and income level of the farmers.
To discuss further some of those points highlighted by Professor Geeta, and perhaps to offer some alternate opinions, I'm pleased to welcome two representatives from the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, though they are based in two totally different geographical locations. Let's journey initially to Vietnam and to James Giles. Mr. Giles, Do you believe that smart agriculture is part of the solution that we are searching for?
I'm always conscious when we speak about climate smart agriculture as a solution when considering the extent of the challenges we're trying to address, such as building resilience to climate change among some of the world's most vulnerable communities, supporting sustainable agricultural development, including for smallholder farmers who've often been left behind, ensuring food and nutrition security for a growing population, and reducing the contribution of the agriculture sector to global greenhouse gas emissions. So while CSA may not be a solution to these problems, I believe it's one of the most effective tools we have at our disposal to try and address these compounding challenges. From my experience, the strength of CSA lies in its breadth and flexibility. When most people, we hear the word CSA, they think of on-farm practices, when in fact the concept is much broader, including a focus on developing the technical, policy, and investment conditions necessary for sustainable agricultural development of the agriculture sector under climate change. The flexibility of the concept allows it to be widely adjusted to different global contexts, ensuring it remains relevant and does not attempt to impose measures from other countries and regions. Finally, CSA encompasses a number of different concepts that remain important in their own right, but can equally fit under the CSA umbrella. So yes, CSA is part of the solution, but so is value chain development, biodiversity conservation, the empowerment of women and girls, increased mechanization, access to finance, and many more that can both stand on their own or be considered components of CSA.
Let's now turn to Dr. Arun, who has joined us from the USA. Dr. Arun, from a practical point of view, what does CSA mean to an ordinary farmer working on the plot of land?
Okay, so I can share an experience from the farmer's point of view. In the farmer's field, they normally faces three kind of climates: climatically very good years, climatically normal years, and climatically bad years. So within these three different type of climatic conditions, farmers need to adopt different technologies, practices, and they should have access to different climatic services. So during the climatically good years, they always try to maximize their benefit by using different technologies and practices. So during the normal years, they try to maintain the normal productions. So that might be around the average. So the most critical part is during the bad years. When farmers face bad climatic conditions, they have to adopt different range of climate smart agriculture technologies, practices, and services. That is very much important. And sometimes the agriculture system, crop and livestock system might fail, and they need additional support, for example, insurance and other social support systems.
So climate smart agriculture has its very distinct objectives, its own targets for productivity and methods of resilience, and of course, its vital targets for emissions. So, Mr. Giles, what are the entry points for initiating climate smart agriculture practices? Where do we begin?
I believe this question on entry points is extremely important when talking about climate smart agriculture in South Asia. Because what we've seen in our work is that while many of the practices and technologies we're promoting as climate smart have been around for a long time, the adoption rate remains very low. The reason that we see such low levels of adoption is that there are a number of barriers that act not only to frustrate the adoption of CSA, but to constrain the development of the agriculture sector as a whole. Therefore, by focusing on entry points, we're looking to make interventions at the source of the problem, gradually removing these barriers till the correct conditions are in place for the adoption of CSA. These entry points may be filling existing knowledge gaps, improving technical capacity, market access, access to credit, or influencing policy design. As a research for development organization, on the impacts in the areas where we're looking, in order to achieve impact in the areas where we're looking, we're trying to identify partner organizations that we can work with, and we can provide information to generate an evidence base to support their activities. And to do this, we must understand the priorities of the different actors and align our research outputs to their needs. This is where we see different entry points emerge depending on the types of interventions we're proposing and the different end users. So, for example, for national or provincial policymakers, a key entry point is quantifying how the interventions can support the attainment of key policy objectives, whether they're focused on climate change adaptation, rural development, food security, or climate change mitigation through the NDCs. These recommendations need to be targeted towards ministries and departments mandated for their implementation and include clear and costed implementation plans. If we identify a role for international organizations to support a project, we should quantify how the recommendations we make align with their programmatic priorities and at a scale that is appropriate for that organization or fund. So therefore, the tools that we need to provide the evidence base include field and landscape level cost-benefit analysis, greenhouse gas mitigation assessments, environmental impact assessments, and even ESG reporting to attract sustainable finance.
You're aware, Dr. Arun, of the farming practices in South Asian countries. So do you believe that this is an economically viable approach described by Mr. Giles?
Well, a range of studies have been conducted in South Asia, so by my organizations and a lot of other organizations to test and evaluate climate smart agriculture practices at the farmers' field. So these studies shows climate smart agriculture is a viable option for economically viable options for many farmers. For example, change in tillage practices, water, nutrient, and energy management, use of improved seed and breeds can maximize economic benefit and also help to adopt climate change in the agriculture sectors. But we should not forget that all economically viable cases may not be scaled up. So we need to look at three key issues in economic viability. So one is marginal return on investment are very low so far in agriculture sector in terms of climate change adaptation. Then the second point, uncertainty in return on investment. So climate change impacts are highly uncertain, unpredictable. So investment is also uncertain and unpredictable in terms of return. Then third, we need to look at individual farmers versus food market. So individuals might not get a lot of benefit from adopting climate smart agriculture, but the small climate change impact in large number of farmers may drive a lot of negative impact in food market. So economically big impact can see in the market level. So if we compare individual and social cost and benefits, they significantly differ. So what it shows that the scaling CSA needs public investment and attention. So this is really important, and this is economically viable and scalable.
I mean, considering the economic situations of small farmers in this region, and also we all know that they are very small, most of them are small landholders. What kind of policies are needed to mainstream climate smart agriculture into development planning process? Dr. Arun.
Well, if we look at South Asian countries, there are millions of smallholder farmers, and they might need really different kind of policies. But what we can see in South Asia, in my experience, there are a couple of policies that might help to scale up climate smart agriculture. For example, we can see a lot of investment in agriculture sector from the government through subsidies. So managing subsidies in agriculture or by diverting subsidies to adaptation and mitigation actions, that is really important in terms of South Asian context. Then another, I can see the evolving private sector involvement in agriculture sector, like agribusiness companies. So reforming existing agriculture extension system, integrating private sector through different policies, tax policies, subsidy policies, that is another area for policy reform. Then also we can see investment is a real issue in South Asian countries. So the blended finance, integrating public and private sectors together is another area for scaling climate smart agriculture. Then one area there are not much focus in the region is consumer side, the demand side. So we are focusing a lot in supply sides, the consumer sides, the promoting healthy and climate friendly diet that might also help a lot of adaptation in agriculture sector, particularly in the smallholder farming system.
So, and finally, Mr. Giles, is the region heading in the right direction to implement climate smart agriculture policies?
In short, yes. For example, climate smart agriculture is already explicitly mentioned in Nepal's 2016 Agriculture Development Strategy, which highlights the need to improve the capacity of extension staff and farmers on CSA. In Pakistan, the 2018 Agriculture and Food Security Policy highlights the role of CSA in adapting the agricultural production to a changing climate, with CSA also highlighted in provincial policies for Punjab, Balochistan, and Sindh. And while Bangladesh's 2018 National Agriculture Policy doesn't mention CSA by name, the policy does make reference to many of the key components of CSA. And CSA practices and interventions can also be found located in other national climate change policies, development plans, and the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. However, despite the inclusion in policy at both a national and subnational level, there remains quite a large implementation gap, with many of the recommendations not being executed on the ground due to insufficient budget allocation. For example, recent research we did in KPK province, Pakistan, showed that while the agriculture sector contributed 14% of the provincial economy, the agriculture department received only 3.8% of the provincial budget, constraining its ability to fulfill its policy objectives. From my discussions with policymakers, one of the reasons they highlight for implementation gaps for CSA is that they lack information on what needs to be done to implement these practices at scale. And this is where we see there being a lot of roles for international organizations to ensure that their activities are used to help inform policymakers of key components for successful implementation. In addition to this, many of the existing policies focus on on-farm CSA practices, failing to include measures that support the enabling environment for their adoption, such as access to climate information services, markets, and credit. So any policies that are to effectively facilitate the widespread adoption of CSA will need to actively address these conditions.
Many thanks to you, Mr. Giles and Dr. Arun, for joining us today. Thank you. Before we bring this episode to an end, let's briefly explain how ADPC is supporting climate adaptation and resilience in Asia through the Care for South Asia project. Here is Dr. Pashupati Chaudhary, Senior Resilient Agriculture Specialist at ADPC, to share some details about this.
Agriculture is an important sector of the Care for South Asia project. Through this sector, we aim to create enabling environment to enhance climate resilience in agriculture and improve climate vulnerable farmers' economy and livelihood in South Asia region. We aim to strengthen the national policy framework and strategies and produce regional and country-specific guidelines documents to support the implementation of climate-smart agriculture practices. At the country level in Bangladesh, we are identifying critical policy actions and strategies and developing a monitoring framework to make the agriculture sector climate informed. We will facilitate the implementation of recently developed CSA investment plan We are also trying to build capacity of government stakeholders to utilize climate and hydrological data in Nepal. The project will also provide advisory services to the Agriculture Land Ministry to implement investment plan. The project will also institutionalize a systematic planning and development process at the country. We will also strengthen the capacity of agriculture extension workers so that they can provide training to the farmers on CSA and climate risk mitigation practices. In Pakistan, likewise, the project will help strengthen the existing CSA strategies and strategic framework concerning agroclimatic zoning in Punjab province. We will identify critical policies, approaches, and actions to support the national policy framework and facilitate the implementation of climate resilient policy in the country. Our goal is also to build capacities of different ministries like other countries and departments in Punjab for sector reforms, policy making, planning, monitoring, and investment designs.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Climate Talks. As usual, you may offer comments or send your questions to us through the ADPC's website, and we will be very happy to respond. Please join us next month for the next program in the series. Until then, goodbye.